PBK is a multidisciplinary architecture firm based out of Houston, Texas. We primarily do K through 12 and higher education type projects, but we also do mechanical engineering, civil engineering, corporate commercial, and various other project types. We have offices throughout Texas. The VizLab was something we started last year to provide high-end illustration services for the firm and also for outside firms. When we first started looking at creating the VizLab, we were really looking for a way to continue PBK's mantra of providing performance-inspired design and providing the best client service possible. And we're able to leverage the hardware that we get from Box to really provide stunning visuals, innovative presentation types to our clients just as the way that we work. And I think that's something that really differentiates PBK from other firms out there that don't have the capabilities internally that PBK has. Typically a project starts when it comes in from Houston. I mean, most of our projects come from our Houston office, being that that's our main design hub. And when we get a project, we usually talk with the different partners involved, the design team that's involved, and we establish a storyboard, a rough storyboard for the project. And sometimes we'll go to Houston or go to the different offices to actually talk with them in person. But we present that storyboard and flush it out to where we're actually showcasing the project in the best way possible, given the situation, because most of our projects are being presented to school boards, but then sometimes they can be presented in a public forum, which is a very different presentation type. And so we try to adapt our projects to be the best presentations for the situation type. Presenting to a school board, I think, is the most common presentation type that we have, where you have 8 or 10 people sitting in a semicircle looking at boards, and then you'll put up an animation on a TV or a projector. And that's actually relatively simple for us. It's when you get public input that it becomes more challenging, because you start having to put more information into the visuals. You have to think about how different people are going to react to the project, and architectural projects tend to be, they tend to elicit emotion in people, and so you want to make sure that you're bridging that gap and explaining the project in the most sensitive fashion possible.
So then it not only becomes an architectural project, but then it also becomes marketing.
And I think one of the big differentiators for PBK as a firm as a whole, what we do, what the VizLab does, doing animations, doing renderings, augmented reality, we're starting to use Oculus Rift in our projects. These things are things that we just do. They're not additional costs that we send to our clients and say, hey, you got to pay however much money for an animation. We just do it. It's what makes our projects better. It's what helps our projects actually be better projects for our clients and be more effective pieces of architecture. So our workflow typically is we get models from SketchUp or Revit, from design or production teams in Houston or other various offices. And we bring those models into the VizLab and bring them into 3ds Max. We typically render with V-Ray and do compositing and post-production in various Adobe products. When we have a tight deadline on an animation, we'll use something like Lumion, which is very effective because it renders so quickly. And then we also use other software like Eon's View for doing large terrainscapes, just because it can produce thousands and thousands and thousands, if not actually millions of trees, and really just not bog down the computer at all. So it's very effective when we have a large landscape to use Eon, and it plugs directly into Max.
Ultimately, our design team and our production teams are faced with deadlines. So sometimes they have to do everything in a crunch. And we may get some models that are rough looking, and we have to go in there and make sure and clean them out. Sometimes we get models which are very large in polygon counts, and they bog down our scenes. The process that we use is we coordinate with our design teams, and we bring their models in, and we say, what spaces are we going to need to show here? So we'll go into the model and we make sure that we clean them out. Sometimes it's walls or ceilings that have to be flushed out. And the process in which we do this is taking or exporting their model and bringing it into 3ds Max, where we have more freedom to design and sort of set up our scenes. It's about applying materials to all the surfaces. It's about bringing in furniture, and it's about setting up a scene.
And also part of that workflow isn't only just cleaning them up for the sake of cleaning them up or for making the computer run smoother. It's also, because we're doing a lot of animations, we can't have huge scenes. I mean, Revit tends to create very heavy models, and so we like to, like you said, clean those out and get more optimized models into the base Revit frame of the building. Also, what we found being very effective, especially working with our design teams who like to iterate and iterate really up until the last minute, the Revit linking tool that Autodesk implemented a few years ago has been, really indispensable, because we can link in Max to the Revit central file, and whenever something's changed in Revit, then it changes in Max. Our materials stay, our material assignments stay, our lighting stays. Everything that we've been doing to make it look like a finished building, at least as an image of a finished building, is reflected in the updated model, which allows our design teams to continue designing, continue doing their job, and we don't end up slowing them down as much as we would in a traditional type workflow where it's like stop designing and then wait a couple weeks for your finished animation.
And that just makes for a more efficient workflow, and it gives our design and production team more time and more freedom to be able to design or have more detail in what they in turn give to us.
So prior to using our render farm or our render farm on wheels, we really just had a hodgepodge of Dell workstations that were, some were old, some were new, some had some RAM, some had more. They were just really systems that weren't being utilized. We put Max on them and tried to tie them together just to render. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I probably spent half my time just managing the hodgepodge of systems. And it wasn't a very effective way of working. So when I had the opportunity to start the VizLab, one of the things I did was suggest that we need to get a proper managed render farm, and part of that component was contacting Box and getting a render farm on wheels. So I became aware of Box back around 2006 while I was working at Jacobs, but Box actually came out and demoed a render farm on wheels for us, and it was just amazing the amount of work that I thought I could get done with a row. Hours and hours and hours of rendering time now got reduced to minutes. And that just meant that I could really work a lot quicker, get a lot more product out, and ultimately that's the name of the game, is how many renderings can you get out, how many animations can you get out in a certain amount of time. And the more you can do, the better you're going to be as a group. And I was really impressed with Box's systems, not only the look and feel of them, but also the know-how of the people that were talking about the systems. They really understood the workflow, which was extremely important to me. I wasn't dealing with Dell or HP or another vendor that they sell mass systems that they're trying to make the systems run equally well on all kinds of different programs. Box really knows the AEC industry, they know the visual effects industry, and they're able to custom tailor their machines to work the best with the software that we're using. So when it came time to start the VizLab, I knew where I was going to go immediately, and that was to Box. So the performance specialist that I worked with closely was Rich Pettit. And I started interacting with him probably about 6 months before I even brought up the idea of a VizLab to our CEO, because I just wanted to make sure that I had all my ducks in a row, and I wanted to make sure that the row was the exact solution that we would really need if we did create the VizLab. And Rich was extremely helpful. He knew the type of work that we were doing, he knew the software applications, and he was able to specify a system or a render farm on wheels that would best meet my needs. And when I came to him with numbers later down the road, it seemed like a hobby to him to put out multiple specifications of systems. It seemed like he was having so much fun just giving me different specifications, different pricing, and just trying to figure out the best type of system that would work for us. And one thing that was a little bit different about what I asked for was the RAM usage, or the amount of RAM that I needed in the systems. For animations, we don't use very much RAM because textures are all pretty small, but we do some very large resolution images on a project per project basis. Typically we need one large, really nice image for our construction site boards, those boards you see on the side of the road when they're building a piece of architecture. And those boards, they tend to want to print them at 150 dpi, 8 feet by 5 feet, and just huge images. And so when you do that with thousands of proxy objects and thousands of trees and people and cars and high resolution textures, you need a lot of RAM. And so we ended up putting 64 gigs of RAM in each of our nodes, and that allows us to render those high resolution images really, really quickly. One example is when we first started the VisLab, we had a project for Lone Star College, and I really wanted to just test the limits of my Dell workstation, which I was rendering on. And so I sent this large, 5 foot by 8 foot, 150 DPI image, and it took 2 days to render. It just took an incredible amount of time. Fortunately, I had another system there on my desk so I could keep working. But once we got the row in, it finished in a matter of hours. And just being able to crank out a scene that wasn't properly optimized, and I did that on purpose just to test, that quickly, it was just amazing turnaround, and it means that now we can render at higher resolution. We can use higher resolution textures, and we're never worrying about whether we're going to be able to get a render done on time. And that to me is just, it makes the whole process of getting the VisLab started, getting the row, worth it. Because now if anybody asks for anything, we can get it done. We know that we're not going to be bottlenecked by our render time, at least within our workflow. And what I really liked about the Render Farm on Wheels solution is that it's a turnkey solution. It came in 2 boxes. One had the case and the power supply, and then the other one had all the individual nodes. And it literally took me, an hour or so to plug everything. Yeah, I put it together, and we were up and running right away. And that was extremely impressive to me. There was really no setup. We haven't had any downtime since we've gotten it. Every time that we need to render, we just hit render, and we know that the Render Farm is there for us. And it's properly managed now. I mean, we're using Pipeline Effects Cube to manage our render job, or queue management. We're also working with Pipeline Effects to develop a SketchUp job type, which is something that nobody else out there is doing. So that's something that the VisLab is doing to innovate in our industry. And having that properly managed render farm really provides an indispensable asset to the entire firm, because at a point soon to come, all of our SketchUp users are going to be able to render the farm as well. And that's going to accelerate their workflow, because now instead of having their machines, their desktops, bogged down or completely utilized to where they can't work for a matter of hours during the day, now they can just send it to the render farm in San Antonio, and they can continue to work. And then a short time later, they'll get a finished image back, and they can do whatever they need to do with it. So having a render farm on wheels, not only was it quick and easy to set up, but it's also accelerating our workflow, our design department's workflow, and it's really helping the firm as a whole. So looking at the future of the VisLab, obviously we're thinking of growing, and we're working towards adding a few members to the VisLab in the near future. And Box is going to be an integral part of that. I mean, obviously we have the row, and that helps execute our projects with our current workflow. But when I look at where the industry is going and where our software is going, it's really going to more of GPU compute applications, things like Lumion, and more high-end tools like Lumion, like V-Ray RT, that are able to render very detailed models very quickly on the GPU. And when I look at Dell, HP, and other manufacturers out there, you can't get a workstation that is GPU compute centric and really optimized for that type of work. But you call up Box, they're ahead of the game. They know what software is coming down the pipeline. They're talking to the visual effects guys and all the people in Hollywood. And ultimately, the technology we're using is stuff that came out of Hollywood, but we're probably a few years behind the game. And so Box has the solutions there for us to actually, down the road, get a system that's going to have multiple GPUs, fast overclock CPUs that can render the scenes quickly on the GPU and on the CPU. And then now we have the row that we can send animation projects to as well when we need to do CPU compute. So as the group grows, I'm not only thinking about just the pure hardware aspect. What's impressed me a lot also about Box is just the customer service. I mean, everybody's so knowledgeable about the hardware that we use. They're able to talk with us and actually discuss things with us in ways that other manufacturers can't. And so I know that going down the road, if I run into roadblocks, not just with the hardware, but also with how the software is running on their computers, I know I can call up Box and they'll be able to test and figure something out and help me find a solution to the problems I'm having. And that's something that they've iterated to me multiple times, and I find that very impressive, because I'm not going to get that kind of customer service out of other firms that are out there.